The first and most infamous musical in Hollywood was The Jazz Singer from 1929. It featured few spoken lines but many songs. It was largely singing, as the technical limitations of the time didn't allow for singing and dancing at the same time.
You like that, Mama? I'm glad
There were many intertitles used for dialogue, as was typical. The 1930s saw some of the first color musicals and the crossing of the genre from its primitive to classical stages. In fact, there were over 100 musicals released in the year 1930.
Wonderful. Why, if our scarecrow back in Kansas could do that, the crows would be scared to pieces.
The use of spoken dialogue had become commonplace by the end of the 30s, and the silent film had completely disappeared from the film scene. By the early 1940s, the technical abilities of the craft allowed for more complex singing and dancing, as seen in films like Cabin in the Sky from 1943. This tradition was inherited from Broadway and became a hallmark of the genre in its classical era. By the 1950s, the genre was in full swing. Many of the most well-known musicals are from this era, including Singing in the Rain, The King and I, and American in Paris.
Could be grander than to be in Louisiana in the morning.
In the morning, it's great.
The 1950s into the 60s saw the beginning of the revisionist musical, with twists on the classic formula like Gigi, which was the first musical filmed on location, Mary Poppins, with a mixture of animation and live action, and The Sound of Music, with grandiose European scenery.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
When it comes to the genre style and techniques that classic musical Hollywood films used, many of them borrowed and copied elements from one another. For starters, many classical Hollywood films had bright and lavish colors. The scenes were often filled with colorful backdrops, eye-catching costumes, and oversaturated scenes. In An American in Paris, this scene plays with colorful costumes against an equally colorful background. In Gigi, the costumes that the women wore in the restaurant scene were lavish and vivid. Even though these women were background characters, they still stood out. And finally, in The Wizard of Oz, one of the most iconic scenes in Hollywood cinema is when Dorothy steps out of her house into the land of Oz. Immediately, the change from black and white to color transfixes us, and we are transported to a world of color. Another technique that many classical musical Hollywood films used is the use of song and dance to tell a story. In The Sound of Music, Maria dances with Captain Von Trapp for the first time. This is the moment she realizes she's in love with him. There are no words in the scene, just music, and the story of their first moment falling in love is told through a dance. In Gigi, Gaston realizes he's in love with Gigi. To express his emotions, he sings a song about her as he walks through the park. The last technique that classical Hollywood movies use is at least one fantasy sequence, which is generally in the middle of the film. This is usually used as a filler scene to expand the runtime of the film. In Mary Poppins, Mary, Bert, and the children hop into a chalk drawing and are transported into a magical animated world with talking animals. In Singing in the Rain, Don performs a 10-minute Broadway number, which audiences later learn that it's all in his imagination. And in An American in Paris, Adam daydreams he's performing a song in a concert hall. As the scene progresses, it's revealed that Adam is the conductor, other orchestra members, and even a concert goer.
There are several key narrative conventions that make up a classical musical. The majority of musicals are romances and often involve some form of a love triangle. For example, in Cabin in the Sky, Little Joe has a relationship with his wife Petunia as well as his mistress. And in An American in Paris, Milo, who is helping Jerry sell his art, eventually develops feelings for him, but Jerry ends up developing feelings for a much younger woman named Lisa.
Our love is here to stay.
There is always a form of resistance between the two characters that ultimately end up together.
You keep away from me just because you're a big movie star, wild party, swimming pools. You expect every girl to fall a dead faint at your feet. Well, don't you touch me.
Another convention is the time periods in which the films take place. Many classical musicals are also period pieces. The King and I, which came out in 1956, takes place in 1862. Singing in the Rain takes place in 1927, though it was actually shot in the early 50s. Gigi was also released in the 50s, taking place in the turn of the 19th century. Every film needs some form of comedic relief, often left up to the sidekick character. In Gigi, it's Honoré.
We met at 9.
We met at 8.
I was on time.
No, you were late.
Ah, yes? I remember it well.
In Singing in the Rain, it's Cosmo.
Moses, he noses his toes aren't roses, as Moses supposes his toes is to be.
Musicals don't have an obvious bad guy. Typically, the protagonist is dealing with an internal battle or fighting an external force beyond their control.
The American film industry was dominated by major corporate-style studios in the 1930s. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, led by Louis Mayer, was one of them. It became the biggest, most predominant, and most star-studded studio of all, making it the home of the stars. By 1934, MGM had over 60 big-name actors under contract. MGM had the largest stable of stars of all the studios, including Joan Crawford, Clark Gable, William Powell, Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, the Barrymores, and more. By 1932, Hollywood studios had glutted the public's tired appetite, and their overexposed, song and dance epics went into commercial decline. Fortunately, musicals produced at Warner Brothers reached their full flowering by capturing the unique, innovative, surrealistic choreography of Busby Berkeley, who arranged actors in geometric, kaleidoscopic displays. The first of Berkeley's musicals was Lloyd Bacon's backstage show, 42nd Street. The successful musical inspired the Gold Digger series of films with more of Berkeley's trademark choreographing. In 1933, 20th Century Fox signed 5-year-old Shirley Temple. Much to their financial delight, the studio provided audiences with their pint-sized star radiating optimism and singing and dancing in hits like Stand Up and Cheer, Bright Eyes, Heidi, Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm, and The Little Princess. From 1935 to 1938, Shirley was the #1 box office attraction in the world, who later was overtaken in 1939 by another young star, MGM's Mickey Rooney.